between your two talks, you have this sort of. Do you see a closeness or a distance? What makes this sort of Indian Shakespeares? Could you maybe address how do you kind of relate to 10mm Love or Arshinagar? So, wondering what's the kind of uniting aspect of these.
They are both kind of united and different. I mean, that's the kind of whole joy of it, that, you know, different kind of cinemas. But they are united, first of all, in their use of language, isn't it? Because it's very urban, contemporary, and yet, kind of, you know, it's not Indian. This is what Koil was saying that she speaks like when I am in India, and if I'm speaking to someone, kind of, you know, even to Koil sometimes.
Yeah, we'll be
slipping Hindi and English and kind of, you know, talking like that, and neither of it is very kind of, you know, pure as Bollywood sometimes uses. So I think with both of these films, what is uniting them is this really urban vocabulary that is being used. And I think that's an influence of multiplexes, because multiplex cinemas, which allow multiple screens, have allowed these movies to be screened, because otherwise you just have one screen and inevitably, you know, the highest grossing Bollywood current flick would be on it. But multiplex audiences kind of, you know, you can devote a screen to these movies, and I think people who are flocking to the multiplexes would be young, urban, middle classes, and this is kind of, you know, a movie that is designed to appeal to their senses.
I think more importantly, presently especially, any Shakespearean film in India is talking about Indian issues. You know, Shakespeare is not a cultural icon or something to be revered or held in awe anymore. Shakespeare is just being used as a template, as Arshinagar, as Sen says, that it's a template. Everyone in India knows Shakespeare. So it's the easiest way to get your message across.
That's true. I mean, Sharat Katari as well, he was saying that, you know, one of the questions he was being asked was, why Shakespeare? And he said, I never began with Shakespeare. I began with wanting to make a movie about these Ram Leela actors. I began with a desire to make a movie about aphrodisiac sellers in India, which is why, you know, 10ml Love is their most potent potion. So he said, I began with those desires and realized, okay, you know, love potions, aphrodisiac sellers, well,
where have I heard that
where
before?
have I heard that before? And he used Shakespeare as a template. So they are being kind of, you know, addressing Indian issues. But as the thing is, and kind of global cinema scholars have noticed this before, the more local you go, the more global the issues become. So he's talking about art and money and indie filmmaking, which is a very Indian issue right now, kind of talking about Ram Leela troops, talking about this indie film industry which has started, but that is obviously globally applicable. Again, with Sen as well, she's talking about kind of, you know, Babri Masjid, and she's talking about the current political climate in India, the factions, Hindu-Muslim rights, but again, this becomes, you know, talks to global issues. So in that case, kind of, I think these are the strands that are really uniting all of these Indian Shakespeares.
So this is sort of, Shakespeare is a way of is this a way of also communicating within India? Is it?
Yeah,
so
sure,
it's between
absolutely.
different cultures.
Yeah, because interestingly, that's when I watched Haider, I went in to see Hamlet. I knew nothing about the Kashmir issue, to be perfectly honest. I mean, I lived in Kolkata all my life. Very few people actually realize what happens inside Kashmir. You know, the fact that people in Kashmir don't have cell phones, they don't have a cell phone network. People disappear overnight, you know. This is something that other Indians are not even familiar with. So when Bhardwaj takes Hamlet to the rotten state of Kashmir, it's a revelation to Indians as well, because we're like, hold on, this is a different angle. And that's why I keep saying it's not a very Bollywood film. It tackles real issues, very serious issues. And there is song and dance, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
There's always song and dance in a Hindi
There's an
film.
amazing Gravediggers song.
Oh,
That's
gosh.
my favorite.
That's possibly
The two
the
Gravediggers
highlights.
songs.
How do you? Oh, this is one of those things that I don't know. This is a kind of cultural thing. As a Finn, I don't know if I'm hesitant to say inherently suspicious of song and dance routines, but it is. There's. I mean, from my country, who's taking this sort of Argentinian tango and made it into its melancholy kind of dance in which there's this minimized movement yet very intense connection of not doing anything. So this is this kind of idea where I come from, and so a lot of I have a problem with all musicals, any of that sort of, because it kind of freaks me out in a way.
I'm so glad you brought this up, because it's my absolute bugbear with Western criticism of Indian kind of films generally. So I'm so glad you brought this up. I'm going to be on my soapbox right now. So the thing, first of all, that I really, really want to refute is that Indian films are not musicals. Can we stop saying that?
I've already said that.
Yes, you have. It bears repeating.
Sorry, I didn't mean to kind of bring up this sort of serious stuff. I didn't really think that.
This is because
It's a sore spot with us. Because,
yes, because I mean, I think if they are to be likened to anything, I think it should be opera.
Right, yeah.
Because in opera as well, obviously, when characters burst into song, and I've seen audiences weeping as these kind of, people are crying. And do we think that is going to, is real life? Do people kind of, when they're crying, burst into songs? They don't. But the convention is that when words are too kind of hard to express, you will express it in poetry, you will express it, with music. And I think this is what Bollywood films do. So that is the convention. It is not something kind of, I mean, there are songs in movies, admittedly, where they would bear no connection with the narrative, but usually, not so much actually. Usually they are weaved within the fabric of the movie and very much are operatic in that scale. And also, it depends on who's watching it, because, Indians are used to this convention. It would be alien for them. So it is a perception that, songs and dances are dismissed because, first of all, the conventions are different, but also they are very much weaved within the fabric of the movie. So, for example, one of the reviews of Ram Leela, the Bollywood adaptation of Romeo and Juliet, which I absolutely love, said that it was a lavish affair with songs and dances, but much of Shakespeare's poetry wasn't captured. Well, the poetry was captured in the songs and the dances. So, for example, there's a song which goes "Lahu mu lag gaya," which means blood has been tasted. It kind of very much puns on this idea of my desire has risen, blood is flowing through my veins, but also, bloodshed will occur because we have fallen in love. So this kind of poetry emerges in the songs, emerges in the choreography of these kind of sequences. So in that sense, actually, they are very crucial to the poetry of Indian film. But you've raised an important point, because one of the things I often wonder about global cinema, and I think this is great that, Indian Shakespeare should be presented globally, is who gets to review them and who gets to be the gatekeepers. Because it is one thing to, enjoy and say, oh, we welcome, Bollywood Shakespeare. But it is another thing that, who is reviewing these, who is being the gatekeepers, and how much cultural acumen is actually required to be able to give a fair evaluation to the film. So if reviewers are not going to go in with this cultural knowledge and are going to go in not with an open mind, but with a mindset saying, oh, frivolous song and dances, or we're not going to interpret it, then that is a problem. So I think,
can I just interrupt here? There's also a problem with monolingual critics, kind of like, an audience that does not understand the nuances of the language. Yes, subtitles are there for most films.
Yeah.
But for example, in Omkara, and this is one of my pet peeves, so this is my soapbox here. But so in Omkara, the subtitle seems to indicate that Emilia, so Iago's wife, is Othello's sister, Omi's sister. That's not true. I mean, it's indicated because the language says that you think of me as a sister. There's a huge difference. So when a Western critic kind of tries to draw some kind of conclusion on the fact that Othello and Iago are related, that's not true.
Yeah.
They're not, related at all. So I feel it's very important for people like Varsha, myself, Preeti, Thea, who understand the different nuances of the languages, who understand the meaning. The fact that Sen has used the word rishtedar instead of the Hindi word for cousin, which is a direct homage to Shakespeare. This is something that only a multilingual critic can probably gauge. Yeah. So it's very important.
And this happens very much so in songs, because that is all about poetry. Yeah. So there it becomes very tricky as well. And, I'm by no means suggesting that, only kind of Indians should be evaluating these films. But yes, multilingualism is important, and it is important
or some kind of background to the culture, some kind of
cultural background, and some kind of familiarity or well-versedness in the film industries themselves, because you won't be able to see the echoes otherwise.
I was wondering about this situation that it turns into kind of looking at these genres in these sort of ways, or putting into this sort of box. You kind of, I think you get a new type of Orientalism here, don't you? Because you get people kind of taking this sort of aspects of Bollywood, into music videos, like Beyonce or this sort of thing. So this is have this sort of appropriation going on. I mean, how do you feel about this sort of as we already talked about, this sort of conflation of all Indian Shakespeare into Bollywood, but also that there's this sort of Western view. And I think one of these that comes with this sort of Western view is particularly in the 90s and the 2000s. This sort of hyper or kind of sense of reality, in which traditional and even traditional for Western cultures, this ways, narrative conventions are seen as not true or the sort of fake. And I came across this through Chinese martial arts and practice in Finland, of all places. And when the movie Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon came out, and you have this sort of people were just when I was teaching it, people came up to me and said, "Oh, well, so do you teach flying then?" As they were flying in this movie, and this is sort of. I'm trying to get that. What do you guys think? Because for me, I think that there's this sort of simplistic view of narration that I don't know if there's kind of it mixed into.
I mean, one of the reasons why we were so keen to open up the variety of Indian screens and Indian cinemas on offer and the way they're interpreting Shakespeare is precisely that. Because there is a kind of, sometimes when films like that are screened, or even stage productions, I have often noticed, would just, present modern India, they would be leveled with the charge of not being authentic enough. And you kind of sometimes go and see some of the very traditional Indian performances, or what they are billing as Indian traditional performances worldwide, and you kind of think that actually, I really don't know where this comes from, because this is not the India in which I live anymore. So in that sense, it is a throwback to kind of, it's very much orientalizing. In this respect, there's a movie called In Othello, which is quite good and deals with this aspect. So In Othello is obviously a movie adaptation of Othello. It is set in India, where a group of university students is actually performing Othello. And what happens is that there's a French director directing them, and the movie begins with, which is probably my favorite line, and it allows me to swear, so I use it all the time. It actually begins with, "Why the fuck do we have to do Othello in Kathakali?" Which really kind of, Indian students are questioning, why do we have to do it in Kathakali? Because the Western kind of, French director believes that that's what Indian kind of, is. You have to do it in Kathakali. So one of the advantages of this conference is that there's a fantastic range, so that it is very perceptible that, it's not all marigolds and songs and dances, although there is that too.
We do have a Kathakali Othello screening.
We do. We actually do, yes. Kaliyatam, which will be screened. And much as kind of, this is valued, there are many, many other types of ways of being Indian, is what I think it exemplifies.
So in a way, are you almost implying that Shakespeare allows for a sort of cosmopolitanism then to kind of come through this? I mean, is that... So it's almost as if then Shakespeare becomes something that in a way allows for a different sort of element to come in. Because I think one of the things that I found really interesting about both of your talks was when you were kind of talking about the linguistic kind of complexity of it. Were you implying that these films have a particular sort of linguistic complexity in terms of the use of different languages and kind of hybridizing forms, which is distinct from kind of mainstream kind of Bollywood cinema?
Absolutely. Yeah.
And is that partly because these films are designed for a more kind of specialized audience, kind of the sort of audience who would perhaps go to art house cinemas in the UK, right? So in a way, then that Shakespeare then becomes a kind of cosmopolitanizing element within that. Is that, or is that?
Yes, except that there are also very kind of, regional Shakespeares and not cosmopolitan Shakespeares at all. So, for example, Omkara, which is Vishal Bhardwaj's take on Othello, uses a very particular North Indian rural dialect, and he plays with that sort of language. So what we're implying is not that Shakespeare allows for a cosmopolitanism, but Shakespeare is being used as a template for mapping different kinds of Indian identities. Right. So it might be cosmopolitan, it might be rural. I think Shakespeare does kind of, encourage play with language, and hence kind of different types of movies emerge. So, but I wouldn't say it's one or the other. So it would kind of, Vishal Bhardwaj takes it very regional. Aparna Sen,
I think Sen has actually shown the variety across. So the way she's used language, you can actually see the class distinction of the people. So, like I said, so Julie comes from a very cultured background, and her vocabulary reflects that. She's also speaking in this mix of Hindi, Bengali, English. But her vocabulary is high, so much so that Romeo doesn't understand her in one part of the film. Because he's uneducated, and there's a part in the film where his father castigates him, saying, "You've been in the same fourth year for the last 5 years," or something like that. So the way Sen has used, and I found this very peculiar, peculiar in a good way, because it's very real. I mean, that's the kind of society that I'm used to, where someone's language can tell you about which part of India they come from, what their background is, what their educational background. I don't know about Mumbai, but in Calcutta, there's this particular snobbishness about which school you go to and which college you go to, and so anyone who's gone to, say, a particular first-year college kind of set will speak in a certain way, and we recognize each other from actually hearing how they talk. So India is very complex in terms of language, and that I find it fascinating that people like Bhardwaj and people like Sen are using that, and it's real. It's putting off people in the beginning.
It is, yeah.
But would you say that Shakespeare is the element which allows them to kind of carry out these experiments.
Yes.
Right.
That is exactly what we're... Absolutely. Yes. And I think, perhaps we should make it a little bit more explicit in our papers, because it's a really good point, that the challenge of translation actually kind of brings out these linguistic kind of experiments and enjoyments in all of these filmmakers. They might choose to go regional or cosmopolitan, but they're having fun with the language because they're translating Shakespeare.
That's the point I was thinking.
That's it. Yeah.
Well, I was wondering about the kind of, because the both of you, in a way, Coel more addressed the sort of political situation, and I was wondering about the Ramlila troupe, kind of, because Ramlila is the Hindu tradition. Yeah. So I was wondering, is this sort of with Modi? Is this what the sort of conservative Hindu platform? Is it, I was wondering, would he be kind of looking to have a special subsidy for Ramlila troops in the budget or something?
No, in the sense that this is a little bit pre-Modi.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he too, Kataria too, has this talk about religions.
Yeah.
So, for example, in his Paired Lovers, there is the kind of so basically one of the characters, Shweta, who is the Hermia of the story, she is in love with Lysander, who is Peter Pereira, and he's Christian. So in Midsummer Night's Dream, it's never mentioned why one should be preferred over the other, like why is Demetrius preferred by the father than Lysander. But here there are two clear things going on. First of all, that it in the context of a regular arranged marriage, obviously Shweta's parents, so Hermia's parents, are never going to allow Peter Pereira, who is not only Christian but also a car mechanic. So it's kind of, which is worse? We wonder.
I don't know.
I actually don't know about that one. So he too says that, and then his Roshni, who is Titania, and Oberon are actually Muslims. So he has also kind of, been mixing religions and talking about it. Although his talk about money is kind of overtakes the talk of religion, which is an undercurrent through the film anyway. One of the reasons he did not show the entire Ramlila troupe in performance, or not in performance, but at least in kind of, costume, although he had invested money in costumes, is because he obviously, Bottom is frolicking with Titania, the Muslim girl, and if you have a costume of a Hindu god Hanuman frolicking in the woods with a Muslim Titania, that would be very problematic, and he didn't want his film to get into that. So, production circumstances actually kind of were that, religious intolerance dictated kind of scenes in the movie.
So is it, do you think, for both of you, in the sense that Shakespeare, in the language and as Keats said, his negative capability, that you can't pin him down, do you think that, is that one of the reasons why Shakespeare is a kind of fruitful arena for discussing identity and tensions between identity? Because it's as a massive country as India is, there's so many different things happening, and even from where I come from, which is a minuscule country compared to that, we still have these sort of tensions, cultural tensions, which are trying to be paved over by a kind of nationalism in a way. Do you think that Shakespeare, in the sort of Shakespeare's, in a way that sort of that you can't tie him down, proves to be a helpful kind of?
Shakespeare is a matter of tension still in India.
Yeah.
In the sense that Shakespeare is still part of the compulsory English education syllabus. So if you're studying a bachelor's in English, you have to go through Shakespeare.
Yeah.
It's like the schools have stopped making Shakespeare compulsory for the last 3 years, 4 years. Just when I started my PhD, there was a discussion going on about stopping Shakespeare as a compulsory part of school education. So, in order to explain this, I need to explain the roots of Shakespeare in India.
Yeah.
So we've got the Bollywood Shakespeare, which is basically the Parsi theatre tradition, which took Shakespeare as fodder for stories. So they took devices, they took themes, they didn't adapt a whole play. They usually changed the tragedies into happy endings.
Yeah.
For instance, very Tatification of say, Romeo and Juliet or Hamlet, so that's the Bollywood. So that's West India, which used Shakespeare purely for entertainment. And then you come to East India, so Calcutta, which was very strong British influence. Knowing English, being able to perform in Shakespeare. I mean, I remember my father just quoting passages from Julius Caesar randomly to express himself about something. It was a mark of education that you come from a background where you know Shakespeare.
Yeah.
It is still a mark of class.
Yeah.
So English education being very important in India. So you come from a certain class, therefore you know Shakespeare. So there is tension in India right now, even now, about what Shakespeare represents. I personally think it's moving away from the post-colonial kind of feeling for that angst of whether to mimic Shakespeare or to Indianize Shakespeare.
Yeah.
I think it's becoming
moving away, absolutely. But what I think is because, there are still discussions about, why Shakespeare on the syllabus, why do we have to study Shakespeare? And as you say, knowing Shakespeare is, it's as if, why are you studying English literature and Shakespeare? Oh, okay, so, and especially in Britain and so on. So there's still this. Nobody really means it, but there's still kind of, tensions and jibes that you will hear, and knowing Shakespeare is something kind of,
but that's also...
But just kind of but I think we are moving away from post-colonial sort of responses to it, but I think a part of why Shakespeare is being used in this manner to negotiate between the different identities of being Indian is precisely that. Because one of the kind of things is asserting your own identity, saying that actually we're not bothered about Shakespeare's language. What we're going to do is use our own idioms, use our own regional languages.
Yeah.
So I think it is not aggressively post-colonial, but part of the post-colonial program saying, oh, well, I think we'll perform Shakespeare in our language then. Or even kind of, using things like Ram Leela, which are the indigenous theatre forms which died down because of emulation of Western theatre forms. So in a very funny irony and in a very cheeky post-colonial move, now Shakespeare is being used as a vehicle for promoting these kinds of theatrical forms. So it's natural that Shakespeare would be used for talking about identity politics, because we are talking about Shakespeare in terms of identity politics.
But that's what I was trying to say. Identity politics is also very difficult in India, because in Calcutta, knowing Shakespeare is actually a good thing. But if you go to, say, Bombay or Delhi, if you say that I know Shakespeare or I'm studying Shakespeare, they'd go like, okay, so are you trying to show off?
Yeah.
So the reverence for Shakespeare can change from, if you go to Kerala, for example, Malayali language reveres Shakespeare. It's like people still have traditional English performances of Shakespeare, and they want it authentic in the 18th century style. They're very serious about their Shakespeare. So identity becomes an issue every state you go to in India, and how people relate to Shakespeare is also very interesting when you go to the different parts of India.
So there's a bit kind of, besides those kind of geographical differences and religious differences, you also that again touched upon is the class distinction as well, which particularly in the 10 Minute Lobby that came out.
There's class distinctions in this film as well.
That's one of those. One of the people who really don't know much about India, but the sort of very typical tidbit that they might get is usually to do with the caste system and this sort of. I mean, how are these things addressed in a way? How does class figure into the sort of, besides it being geographical areas, but is there some sort of Indian aspect about class there? And kind of.
Well, Arshinagar addresses it because the slum dwellers, obviously, right at the bottom of the rung there. And Sabir Khan, Juliet's father, is a very powerful businessman with links to politicians. So the fact that in India we have this problem of the haves and have-nots, and the caste system is also important when you think of the class system. The caste system is also important, but I think both these films focus on the class system in a way of some people have money, some don't. How are the people with money using the people without money? And that's the way that.
And the freedom to kind of artistic freedom is not available if you don't have money, or the fact that you are not free to love a car mechanic is very much kind of a persistent theme, and money enters the discourse of the film really, first beat, because the car mechanic Peter Pereira's friend says to him that money is a luxury. If you don't have money, you can't basically think that love is available to you. So these films therefore kind of negotiate a boundary, but again, like, Shakespeare is being used for all of this identity politics. One, because Shakespeare is taught in school, so many people would be exposed to Shakespeare stories and templates, so of course he becomes a source of inspiration. But the other is that obviously the people who would be educated in English medium schools would have access to Shakespeare. So Shakespeare is part of identity politics, both in terms of class and in terms of kind of identity according to region. So it is natural that his plays would be used for these kind of negotiating these identities.
There's a very interesting scene in Arshinagar there when the slum dwellers break the fourth wall and kind of complain about people with black money. So people which is probably something with the Panama Papers just coming out, which is quite relevant. But people with black money working with politicians to basically try to obliterate the slum dwellers, which is an interesting kind of commentary when you think about the fact that I was watching the film at a multiplex. The Khans and the Mithers are trying to destroy the slum in order to build a multiplex. So there's this. It almost makes the audience complicit in this whole cycle.
Right.
It's quite an interesting scene there. So because I was sitting there thinking that who knows, maybe the multiplex that I'm in is probably also come out of the same black money or businessmen who've obliterated a slum.
And similarly with Tenem Love, we're there watching a movie in a multiplex, not at a Ram Leela indigenous performance. So it kind of makes you complicit in forcing the decline of these things, which I think is a brilliant technique, and Shakespeare used it himself, making you complicit in, Macbeth going and murdering Duncan. He says, "Is this a dagger I see before me?" And suddenly all of us see that dagger and want him to go and murder. So I think this is also a very kind of, meta-theatrical Shakespeare technique of involving the audience.
Just because I think we're getting knowledge, but a very quick question. I was wondering, kind of reactions to, because particularly about the Arshinagar, is that the Romeo, Rono is 30, and Julia is half his age. Yeah. And I was wondering if this sort of tension, and particularly addressing these issues of women in modern India, and how. I mean, a very, very quick and very small question to the
absolutely.
necessary,
absolutely. An entire role of women in one.
Yeah, it was like a minute maybe. You know.
Well, Sen had a very practical reason for casting in this way, because I had a problem with her casting, so I kind of addressed that. Her thinking was that she always thought of Romeo as a womanizer, as a lech, as someone who thinks of taking advantage of Juliet but then actually falls in love when he comes face to face with Juliet's devotion. Because even if you read Shakespeare, it's Juliet's devotion that actually
inspires Romeo's love. Yeah.
So it's Juliet's devotion, and she thought that if it was a young boy of 15, it wouldn't make that impact. It wouldn't make it seem that the importance of the fact that two people can meet and change each other completely. So she wanted it to be an older Romeo, someone who's seen the world a little, someone who's seen women a little, and therefore gets impacted by this, the purity of the love.
Yeah.
So she had a very practical reason for it. Now, would you want to take on the more serious?
I just want to kind of say about women in Shakespeare films, or in Omkara especially. Women take on a very central role, so I won't give the ending away, but it's changed, and it's changed so that women become very powerful agents in the story, more so than Shakespeare's plays.
Do you see kind of this is a way of in a way, as we actually spoke before, not just the filmmakers, but even you, while you're talking, you're kind of taking this issue, as you said, for yourself, and changing the world in that way.
But not enough.
Yeah.
Yes, there are powerful characters in Omkara. Yes, Tabu is probably the best cinematic Gertrude I have seen ever. And I see Hamlet a lot because it's my favorite play. So all of these kind of powerful roles for women exist, but still, look at it. Kind of, we're inviting a team of Indian Shakespeare's sort of, and they're all men.
Yeah.
In a project organized all by women, they are all men. And it's not like we don't respect them, of course, but it would be great if we had an equivalent women team to choose from. There aren't enough. Aparna Sen stands kind of, alone in this, and I think the new winner of the microwave competition, who's making the Hungry, is a woman, so that's great. And again, I want to see how she deals with Lavinia's rape in the aftermath of the Delhi rape news story that shook the world. There are strong women characters, but I would argue that there aren't still enough women in Shakespeare's India, or India's Shakespeare.
Well, here's hope that you are playing a central role, and hopefully the next generation will be a different one. And
that is our hope. Yes.
And we're getting tired. I think this is maybe a good time to call an end to this. Yes. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
And
thanks for having us.
And just to remind everyone, go check out www.indianshakespeares.com. Also on Facebook, Shakespeare and Bollywood, and Twitter at Shaksbolly with an X. You can find out more information about our lovely speakers and that interesting project that they're working on, and will continue working on after the conference. Right. Yep. But go get your tickets to the conference and come see those fantastic films. Thank you very much for coming. I hope we have you guys again.
Thanks.
Thank you.